Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the LP News Network. Hello, I'm Gus Downing, and today in our ORC series, we're in Los Angeles attending the Los Angeles Area Organized Retail Crime Association's third conference, and we're taking the opportunity to bring together a number of ORC leaders and sitting down and having an open panel discussion about ORC. With us today is Scott Sanford, Director of Investigations for Barnes & Noble, Denny Dancic from Kroger Company, the Corporate Manager of Organized Retail Crime, Deb Lucier, Senior Manager of Control Investigations for the Home Depot, Nelson Herrera, Director of ORC for the Gap Inc., and Joe LaRocca, Senior Advisor to the retail industry and the National Retail Federation. You know, today's session objective of the panel is to provide the retail LP community with a better understanding of the overall ORC history, current events, efforts, and issues facing the nation's retailers. By bringing together a number of the ORC leaders in the industry, we have a unique opportunity to share information that can educate and benefit the industry as a whole, thereby allowing us to better combat the growing problem. With ORC teams being relatively new in the retail environment, this panel allows us to define where we are as an industry, how we got here, and establish the profile of the existing teams and efforts, thus giving us a snapshot of how the industry has evolved and responded, and hopefully along the way establish the factors that contribute to a successful ORC team. Once defined, we'll be discussing the common issues facing the ORC teams and hopefully sharing thoughts and ideas that can help reduce, resolve, or overcome obstacles from both the public and the private sectors. Finally, we'll be talking about the future and asking for everyone's input on how they see ORC evolving and what needs to happen to help combat the growing problem from the preventative, investigative, and legislative perspectives. So with that, we'd like to open to Scott and ask each panel member to give us a little brief background on yourself, on your career, and what brought you to the ORC world. Scott?
Okay. Well, this marks my 25th year in retail loss prevention. When I was a student at Fair State University pursuing a criminology degree, I had the privilege of working for a private investigations firm that outsourced loss prevention to retailers that did not have their own department. Over the last 25 years, I've had the opportunity to work in general merchandising, grocery, pharmacy, home improvement, and now I find myself working in the specialty industry, books specifically. What got me involved in organized retail crime was, I guess for lack of a better term, need. You know, when I took my current role with Barnes & Noble, there were many hats that I wore, one of which was to analyze shrink reports for the company and distribute those to the field. And when you look at what's driving inventory shrink 5, 6, 7 years ago, and you understand your product groups and typically what may drive inventory could be specifically operational process. By tightening the screws and fixing that piece of it, you'll see the cream rise to the top. And what's not reducing in annual losses, clearly that's a problem that still needs to be addressed. And for us, it was items that clearly had an element of external theft attached to it. Audiobooks, medical, computer, DVD. So if we wanted to take our inventory loss and reduce it even further, we needed to address that type of product. And that's where the ORC evolution started for Barnes & Noble about 5 years ago.
Denny?
I was in the district attorney's office for 4 years and then became a special agent and retired after 29 years as a special agent. The last 7 years, I was supervisory special agent in charge of organized crime task forces for 5 states in the mid-Atlantic states. So I was working ORC during my last stint, and the Kroger Company was just actually getting involved in ORC in about 2008. And I retired and I became the corporate manager for the organized retail crime division for the Kroger Company.
And that's the first position of its nature for Kroger, correct?
That's correct. Carl Langhorst, our director, came from a background knowing ORC. When he became director here, he knew how prolific ORC was going to be and already was. So Carl wanted to hire somebody to manage the ORC division for the Kroger company in all their 18 companies. So it was a new start for Kroger back then. And since then, we've hired many ORC investigators throughout the United States in our companies. And that is what they do now. They typically just go after the fencing operations.
Deb?
My background a little bit different, I think, than from my peers in that I've been in the retail market, home improvement, for 25 plus years, and with Home Depot for 17 of that, but only have joined the asset protection, loss prevention side over the last 7 years. So I started more store side as store manager, working in the stores and working my way up through the company that way, and then switched over into loss prevention, and eventually came into the corporate office for the Home Depot. And it was through that role and really focusing a lot on the shrink and trying to mitigate, perhaps more on the internal side, looking at data analytics, trying to identify where the losses are coming from. And using some resources, we saw kind of a natural progression that some of those same tools could be used with the ORC teams that we already had established. So it was maybe through association that I took over, or was given the opportunity from a corporate point of view to take over the ORC teams and try to help support their efforts from the field and to grow to what we are today.
And when did you take over the ORC?
I took over
effort?
just 3 years ago, so just 3 years now managing the ORC teams. We've had the ORC teams in place for about 7 years now.
Nelson?
Well, Gus, I started about 25 years ago. I started actually in juvenile probation, worked in San Jose, California as a part-time juvenile, working in juvenile hall, and wanted to become a cop and actually got a part-time job in a department store. And just morphed into that career. And for field level positions, I worked for Ross Stores, Farmore, it was a former drugstore chain, and then LensCrafters, now Luxottica. And I joined the Gap 11 years ago as an RLPM for Banana Republic. And I didn't anticipate ever being in ORC. I always loved external, anything external, and it was always fascinating. And I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, my first week at the Gap. And the first day I walked in the mall, South Park Mall in Charlotte, North Carolina, I ran into a professional team from New York City. Must have been 6, 7 of them, one of me. I'm out in the mall, I'm watching. It was amazing, absolutely phenomenal. I kind of made it more of a hobby probably for the next few years at Gap Inc., working weekends, going undercover in the malls, and following these teams, and then influencing local law enforcement to arrest these guys once they got out their vehicles. So that's kind of how it started. I didn't plan for it.
So how long have you been specifically managing the ORC function, so to speak?
7 years.
Okay.
7 years for Gap. Yep.
And Joe, how about your background?
Well, Gus, I started in the retail industry as a part-time shoplift detective, and then went on to managing stores as an LPM, spent some time in store operations, and then went to a small retail manufacturing company here in LA, doing loss prevention and some other operational stuff as their director. From there, I went to the Walt Disney Company, where I was the director of loss prevention for 9 years before joining the National Retail Federation about 7 years ago, and now serve as a senior advisor to them and some other groups on loss prevention, asset protection, and related issues.
And you've been heavily involved in the ORC effort from a national level for the 7 years that you were with the NRF, correct?
That's right. When I joined the NRF, one of the functions they really wanted to get into was organized retail crime. At the time, the grocery and drug stores really understood ORC. The limited brands were, from a specialty perspective, really driving the ORC discussion. And NRF wanted to dig deeper. So we started to meet with members and pull together meetings and really analyze what the need was in the field and how we go about addressing what everybody at the time just called professional shoplifting, or the gypsies targeting stores. Those discussions led into a national initiative to train retailers and law enforcement about organized retail crime. Also spent a lot of time on the legislative front at the federal and at the state level, crafting language and legislation that would work to stiffen the penalties for major offenders. And then from a communication standpoint, with the media and talking to the public and making this a well-known issue are all part of the core functions that the NRF has been working on.
And I would again like to congratulate you on the job you've done with La Orca here in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So what we have here is 7 years is the depth. The most recent is 3 years. So in relative terms to the retail industry, we have a young specialization. It's not a tenured older specialization. ORC is young, it's new. ORC from a public sector with the law enforcement, it's young. Even with the federal level, it's young. They just started collecting the data for the coding within the last year and a half. Okay, so what has it grown to in your individual companies? What does your footprint look like now, your team, okay? In your opinion, what's the relative size of the problem for your company and for the industry? So there's a three-pronged question there, a rather big one. So Denny, if you can, sir.
Yeah, I'll give it my best effort, Gus, to answer all three of those points. We see the Kroger company, we see this as a prolific problem. And it's a problem that is increasing every year. We look at the statistics from the NRF and their study that they come out every year. Our company trends follow that we see ORC increasing every year that I've been with the company. What we've done at the Kroger company is hire specific individuals with specific skill sets to look into the fencing operations across the United States. So we have LP that is out there on the front line with our specialists making the apprehensions in the stores. And it's our ORC investigators that take the professional booster and look into the fencing operations.
How many do you have?
We have about 26 people across the United States now, just working ORC. We put our people in the areas where we see the biggest losses, the biggest population, and unfortunately where drug use is prolific also, since that is a driving factor, what we see in ORC cases.
And how do you see it as a problem for the industry as a whole, outside the Kroger?
Outside of Kroger, because we do collaborate with one another on a daily basis. I think that the trends that we see are the trends that the rest of the retailers, whether you're in the apparel business, whether you're in the big box home improvement business, or any retailer, we see the trend escalating. And we look at ourselves and what we have to do to protect our product.
Certainly.
And I think we're all in alignment, all the retailers.
Understood.
With that philosophy.
Deb, but what about the size at Home Depot? I mean, you 3 years, relatively the newest at the table.
Right.
How do you define the issue at Home Depot, the size of the organization, and
Right.
the impact ORC is having at Home Depot?
Sure. Well, when we first started, our first team, if you want to call that, or effort that we had was 3 folks, 3 investigators back in 2005. And around 2008 was when we really started recognizing that this is a problem. And that we needed specialized people with specialized skill set to focus on it, to not detract away from what our field LP folks needed to do at hand within their box. So today we're up to 24 people, so 22 investigators with 2 managers overseeing that group. And as far as where we see the growth of the problem, the more people we've added, the more we find. And as the industry has seen the trends go up, likewise we have too, to the point of, the more we look, the more we find, and there's only so much capacity that those same folks can manage. As far as where I see it in the industry, similar. There's not a case that we don't work that's not impacting one of our fellow retailers. It's that type of nature. It's not single. I don't think we've had one case where it's just Home Depot product. My peers are usually engaged. which makes it more of a frightening problem as far as how big it really is, because I don't think we've really had a way to measure.
So you're
how
not
big it is.
competitors in the world of ORC?
I think it's the most unique, front, because, we're all sales-faced in the economy, and it is competitive, except for in this environment. I think we'd be somewhat foolish to not work with one another on it, exercise each other's skill sets that they can bring. Each team has something dynamic to bring, so why work against one another when we're trying to mitigate loss? So it's really working together, and it minimizes the time to close. I think it takes some burden off of law enforcement. Instead of 3 or 4 different retailers walking in with a similar case, let's combine efforts. And I think it has a benefit for many in doing that.
Nelson, what about the gap?
Well, it's significant. It's significant. We're targeted, we kind of classify it in 3 different areas. We have transient theft rings, which are the best in the world, based out of here, out of Southern California, Miami, New York City primarily. They travel extensively throughout the country. They're the best organized, traditionally nonviolent, actually. Get in and out of our stores pretty quickly, but go after our brand new merchandise. We have habitual offenders, which primarily our Old Navy brand seems to attract. Very volatile, threatening in nature, so not only creating major losses, but really an environmental impact we don't want in our stores. And then financial crimes, to the extent that we actually have dedicated 2 years ago 1 investigator on our team that has a report that comes up every day that shows gift cards purchased over a certain dollar threshold, manually entered, et cetera, and he's shutting down an average now of $1 million of gift cards a year. And so that's, we've had to morph into fall in the crimes
And
that
he's
way.
focused on cards only, gift cards only.
Primarily, but we're looking to expand that position, or maybe other positions, certainly with the other types of financial crimes at the point of sale primarily.
Sure.
Yeah.
And how many are on your team, the ORC team?
At full strength, we're at 20, and we're in 10 major cities throughout the country, just like my peers here, strategically where we need to be, where it's home-based, where the teams are based out of, where we have the most volatility. And then we just put a manager in Toronto, Canada, our first international position. We have a significant ORC problem in Canada.
Do you really?
Yes, we do.
And quite frankly, in doing the daily that we do, that is not an issue that is publicized much in their press, in their media. You don't see a lot of it. It doesn't make the papers, quite frankly, as it does here in the States. Just a little side note there.
Sure.
But Scott, what about the size of your effort?
Well, we classify our shrink through a matrix. About 40% of our loss we attribute to external theft. And that's kind of a moving target from an ORC perspective, but conservatively, probably half of that is directly related to organized retail crime and professional shoplifting. The problem for the industry as a whole, I think the jury is still out in that. You look at the culture of the consumer today, a lot of that has been transitioned to online sales. The online marketplace has taken a significant portion of sales from John Q. Public. And I think once people start getting more comfortable with that, they're going to be starting to look for more deals. The advent of online auction sites over the years, Gus, has really driven a change in the traditional fence because of the ease and anonymity of selling online. And we've interviewed hundreds of these suspects, and I got to tell you, you couldn't pick them out of a crowd. They breathe the same air we do, they bleed the same red blood, some of them are very nice people, but they've crossed that line. And I think coupled with the fact that the recession that hit so hard several years ago, it forced some people to do the unthinkable act of theft. And it's a very addictive thing, is what we're hearing talking to some of these people. So once they do it and they realize they can make as much money, if not more, stealing and selling online, for example, it's tough to get away from that.
How big is the effort there at Barn? How many people do you have on your team?
We have a small team. We've got 700 stores throughout the United States. I've got an analyst that works for me in our financial center, and then I have a senior investigator for East Coast and a senior investigator for West Coast. But we keep them very busy.
Yeah, I'm sure.